Okay, let's unpack this. Imagine, if you will, ancient Athens. It's at its absolute peak, intellectually, culturally.
Right. The heart of the classical world.
Exactly. Philosophers debating everywhere, grand ideas filling the air, academies, public squares, you name it.
A real hotbed of thought.
Now picture someone living right smack in the middle of all that sophistication, not in a nice house, not even, a basic apartment,
Mm.
but in a large ceramic jar, basically a barrel.
Yeah, a pithos, a storage jar.
And not just for a bit, like a stunt. This was his life, his actual home.
Deliberate. A choice.
That's Diogenes, the ultimate ancient Greek iconoclast, maybe the original minimalist. And today, yeah, we're diving deep into his radical ideas and honestly, his even more radical lifestyle.
He's quite a figure.
We're pulling from some really great sources here, ancient accounts, philosophical analyses of cynicism, his views on virtue, freedom, trying to really get a handle on this guy who just decided to live completely on his own terms.
And what's fascinating here is how Diogenes just stands apart. He wasn't just thinking about philosophy. He was his philosophy.
Right. He embodied it.
Totally.
Yeah.
His life was the argument, lived out so completely, so unapologetically, that everyone around him kind of had to stop and look, confront their own assumptions.
He really makes you question things.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
He challenges our basic ideas of what a good life even means, pushing boundaries, poking at norms in a way that honestly still feels incredibly relevant. It's rare, really rare, to see a philosophy lived out quite so starkly.
Which is exactly why he's perfect for a deep dive.
Couldn't agree more.
So our mission today, it's pretty clear. First, we need to get Diogenes in his time, understand that tumultuous historical context. You just can't grasp him without seeing the world he was reacting against.
The background is crucial. Yeah.
Then we'll dig into the core ideas of Cynic philosophy. Diogenes is the most famous Cynic, maybe the most infamous, the living, breathing example of it all.
The poster child, really.
Yeah. And then we'll look at exactly how he put those ideas into practice, often provocatively, unforgettably.
Oh, definitely unforgettable.
After that, we'll break down his specific views: virtue, happiness, society, freedom. Try to find the logic under the seemingly crazy behavior.
There is a logic there. A challenging one, but it's there.
And finally, we'll track his influence. How did this guy in a barrel actually shape later thought? How does he still echo today in debates about consumerism, freedom?
His legacy is surprisingly persistent.
So get ready. We're going back to ancient Greece, but probably not the version you learned about in school.
Indeed. To really get Diogenes, you have to place him. He was born around 412 BC, lived till 323 BC. That puts him right in a period of massive change, massive upheaval in the Greek world.
So not exactly calm waters.
Not at all. Yeah. And he pops up as this incredibly original, controversial figure because his ideas were just so different from let's say, the mainstream classical Greek thought.
Yeah.
Plato, Aristotle, even from Socrates, who was kind of his philosophical grandfather in a way. He took things in a really different direction.
Right. He wasn't just some random eccentric. His whole way of being was a reaction, a pointed response to that world. To really feel the depth of his cynicism, you absolutely have to grasp the socio-political, the cultural context, the stage he played on.
Precisely. Let's set that stage. Think about the 5th century BC, the time just before and during his early life. This is when Athens hits its peak, culturally, politically. Leaders like Pericles.
The Golden Age, right?
That's what they call it. You've got this burgeoning democracy, citizens getting involved in governing well, some citizens, incredible art, architecture, the Parthenon goes up, and crucially is the era that gives us Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, giants.
So a city just buzzing with ideas, creativity, civic pride.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Vibrant intellectual debate, artistic flourishing.
Mm.
It sounds pretty amazing on the surface.
But you mentioned upheaval. Even in that golden age, there was something huge brewing, wasn't there? That crucial turning point, the Peloponnesian War.
Ah, yes. That changes everything. It wasn't just a war. It was, like you said, a societal earthquake.
How so?
Well, it was this long, brutal conflict between Athens and Sparta. Lasted nearly 30 years. And it fundamentally weakened Athens, shattered its power, its confidence.
So the pride took a massive hit.
A massive hit. The aftermath. It shook the whole social order. Imagine this powerful city, so proud of its democracy, its culture, suddenly exhausted, poor, deeply disillusioned. It wasn't just a political loss. It felt existential for many.
People started questioning things.
Big time. The war created huge individual crises. People questioned the foundations of their society, their values, what a good life even meant anymore. The old certainties just seemed to crumble. Wow. And it's that environment uncertainty, moral questioning, this sense of lost ideals that Diogenes grows up in. That's the soil for his radical philosophy. He saw the rot, the hypocrisy in a society he felt had lost its way.
So the Golden Age wasn't so golden underneath, or at least it tarnished badly. And then, as Diogenes is living his life, we get the dawn of the Hellenistic Age. Alexander the Great arrives on the scene, more massive changes.
Even bigger changes in some ways. Alexander's conquests just blow the Greek world wide open. Greek culture, Greek influence spreads like wildfire Middle East, Egypt, even parts of India.
So it becomes less about Athens or Sparta and more about this huge interconnected world.
Exactly. And that means huge cultural interaction, blending of ideas, but also society changes dramatically. Political power gets much more centralized. Empires rise, and the old independent city-states, which were everything to people's identity, they start to decline.
So less local control, more distant rulers.
Right. And for many ordinary people, that meant feeling like their individual freedom was shrinking. They went from being citizens of a small, familiar city to being subjects in a vast, impersonal empire.
A shift from feeling like you had a voice, maybe, to feeling like a tiny cog in a huge machine?
That's a good way to put it. And this complex, fast-changing world, it was a pressure cooker for new philosophies. When the old ways break down, when traditional structures feel shaky, people look for new answers, new ways to find meaning, stability.
Within themselves, maybe?
Precisely. And that's where Diogenes and the Cynics come in. They offered a philosophy that was intensely personal, focused on finding real stability, real happiness inside yourself, because the outside world felt increasingly chaotic and, well, fake.
Let's dive into that philosophical atmosphere a bit more. Even with all this change swirling around, Socrates' influence was still massive, right? His legacy loomed large.
Oh, huge. Socrates fundamentally changed the game. His ethical questioning, what is virtue, what is knowledge, what is happiness, that laid the groundwork for so much Western thought.
That relentless questioning.
Exactly. Pushing people to examine their own lives, seek truth through self-reflection, not just blindly following tradition. The Socratic method probing assumptions, exposing contradictions. He shifted philosophy from asking, what is the universe made of, to how should I live?
And his famous students, Plato and Aristotle, they took that foundation and ran with it, building these incredible systems. Plato with his search for ultimate reality, the world of perfect forms.
Right, this abstract metaphysical quest, suggesting there's this ideal realm beyond our messy everyday experience. True knowledge is grasping those perfect ideas.
While Aristotle, his student, went in a different direction, more grounded.
Much more systematic, empirical, grounded in the observable world, natural philosophy, logic, ethics. He studied everything meticulously. Observation, classification, rational analysis, trying to understand the world as it is.
So you have these really sophisticated, often abstract, academic philosophies trying to map out reality and the good life.
Absolutely, deeply intellectual endeavors.
But as you mentioned, there was this other current bubbling up, this deep societal discontent in Athens. Even with democracy and all that, people weren't happy.
There was definitely a disconnect. The sources point to this widespread frustration. Despite the ideals, people saw, well, inadequacies, corruption.
Especially after the Peloponnesian War, that promise of democracy felt tarnished for many.
Like this system wasn't living up to its own hype.
Exactly. A gap between the grand civic ideals and the messy, often self-serving reality of politics and social life, people felt it. And that created this real hunger for something more authentic. Not just theories, but a practical path to living better in a world that felt increasingly phony.
And that's the opening, that disillusionment, that yearning for authenticity. It just clears the path for these new radical schools, like cynicism.
Precisely. Cynicism didn't just appear, it kind of exploded onto the scene. It grabbed onto Socratic ideas, virtue, living naturally, but cranked them up to 11, made them raw, provocative.
Not just talking about virtue. No. Living it in a way designed to shock, to challenge, to wake people up. The Cynics launched this biting critique of society's artificial values, the obsession with wealth, status, luxury, all the unnecessary rules.
So why were they so radical?
Because they saw society itself as the problem, as fundamentally corrupting. They believed the only way to live truly well, virtuously, was to strip away all that artifice, all the polite lies, the false needs, get back to basics.
And they weren't exactly subtle about it, were they? Which I guess brings us to their name. Right, let's get into that name, Kynikos. the Greek word we get cynic from, and it means quite literally dog-like.
Dog-like, yeah.
Okay, now here's where it gets really interesting, because that dog-like label, it wasn't just some insult they couldn't shake, they owned it.
Yeah.
It described their whole philosophy, unconventional, mocking, maybe even rude to polite society, but they embraced it.
They absolutely did. It was almost a badge of honor. Why dogs? Because, like stray dogs in the city streets, they aim to live independently, simply, shamelessly defying rules and expectations.
Unchained, unpolished.
Exactly. Unafraid to bark back at the established order. Think how shocking that was in a society obsessed with decorum, reputation, social standing, elaborate rituals.
To basically say, I'd rather be like a dog than like you.
Pretty much. To them, dog-like meant being truly free, uncensored, unashamedly natural, living by basic instincts and reason, not by artificial rules and suffocating politeness. It meant being honest in the rawest sense, utterly unconcerned with others' opinions. A living, walking, sometimes literally barking contrast to social norms, a declaration of independence.
In the absolute peak of this dog-like philosophy, the most vivid, unforgettable example, that's Diogenes. Hands down, most famous, most influential cynic, the poster child.
Totally. His stance, his lifestyle, his actions, they perfectly embodied Cynic principles. For Diogenes, life was philosophy. He didn't just lecture about ditching possessions or rejecting norms.
He actually did it.
Every single day, he became this living, breathing proof of his beliefs, a walking, talking, and often barking example. That's what made his philosophy so powerful, so memorable. You didn't just hear it, you saw it. Stark, undeniable.
His life was the lesson. So let's break down those principles, the 4 pillars of cynicism that Diogenes lived out so dramatically. First up, the big one, living in accordance with nature.
This is fundamental. A radical call to strip away everything non-essential. They argued humans should live according to nature. Now, that didn't mean, acting like wild animals without reason.
Right, not just reverting to savagery.
No. It meant aligning with our fundamental human needs and pursuing a virtuous life that resonates with our true, uncorrupted core, which, for them, meant radical simplification.
Getting rid of stuff.
Getting rid of stuff, yes, but also artificial needs, frivolous desires, luxuries imposed by society. Materialism wasn't just a distraction, they saw it as enslavement. It's a conscious rejection of always wanting more, seeing that desire as a chain.
Because society complicates things.
Massively. They believe society moves us away from what's natural, essential, and ultimately good for us. It makes you ask, even now, what do you really need? Versus what society tells you that you need to be happy or successful.
That distinction is key. And once you start figuring out what's truly necessary, it leads right to the second pillar, self-sufficiency. Autarkia.
Autarkia. Crucial. Diogenes' North Star. The idea is that individuals should be utterly self-sufficient, independent of anything external.
Like building an inner fortress.
Exactly. Unbreachable. True happiness, for a cynic, doesn't come from wealth, approval, status, not even physical comfort. It comes entirely from within, from your ability to be content with what you have and truly need.
So cultivating inner strength.
Inner resilience, yeah. Discipline. Making yourself impervious to fortune's whims, others' opinions, market crashes, whatever. If your happiness isn't tied to external things, those things can't take it away. Radical independence, that was the goal.
Sounds incredibly freeing, but also incredibly difficult. It demands a level of self-control most of us probably avoid. Which brings us neatly to Pillar 3, the outright rejection of social norms and values. Diogenes was famous for this.
This is where the dog-like part gets really confrontational. Cynics saw most social values, wealth, status, reputation, prestige, even good manners, social rituals as totally artificial, unnecessary, illusions, shackles.
Not just inconvenient, but actually harmful.
Yes, because they believed most societal rules don't liberate, they enslave, create false needs, encourage hypocrisy, demand conformity. This conviction fueled their confrontational, critical, sometimes shocking behavior towards conventions.
They were just disagreeing. They were actively trying to undermine society's authority.
By showing how absurd they thought it was. Imagine the discomfort they caused in polite Athens, publicly challenging everything from how you eat to how you debate philosophy.
So it wasn't just random rebellion or trying to offend people. There was a deep philosophical critique behind the provocations. A method.
A deliberate method, yes. Which leads to the final and maybe the most important pillar. The ultimate aim, the priority of virtue.
Virtue, or virtue.
For cynics, virtue was the highest purpose, the greatest good, the only thing truly worth chasing. But critically, it wasn't just theoretical knowledge like you might discuss in a seminar.
It was practical.
Entirely practical. A lived way of being applied directly to your conduct every single day. And Diogenes, he took this to the absolute extreme. His whole life was his philosophy in action, totally different from contemporaries debating ethics in lecture halls.
He showed virtue through doing, not just talking.
Exactly. Often in ways that forced this immediate gut reaction from people. He was basically a living embodiment of his ethical principles, a walking argument for living authentically.
It really makes you think how countercultural that was then, and honestly, how much it still is. Think about our modern world, the emphasis on external validation, status symbols, material stuff, fitting in. Diogenes feels like a direct challenge to almost all of it. So Diogenes didn't just talk the talk, he definitely walked the walk, often, literally right through Athens. His life wasn't just a story, it was this continuous, bold performance piece,
Right.
living proof of his beliefs.
Absolutely. Ancient sources consistently back this up, his incredibly simple, minimalist life. His deep, profound disdain for possessions, comfort, social standing. He didn't just dislike them, he held them in contempt, saw them as chains.
And every public act, it seems, was deliberate. A philosophical statement meant to expose hypocrisy, make people think, like the famous lantern story. That's one everyone knows.
Right. The image is so vivid. Diogenes walking through the crowded agora, the main square, in broad daylight, holding a lit lantern.
Which is just weird in itself.
Totally weird. And when people, puzzled, asked him what on earth he was doing, he'd apparently say, with that cynical edge, "I am looking for an honest man."
Wow. Talk about a public indictment. What's the deeper layer there?
It's a stark critique of human hypocrisy, of corruption in society, a biting commentary on the moral state of Athens. In a city priding itself on virtue and democracy, Diogenes is saying true honesty, real virtue is so rare, so hidden by pretense, you need a lantern to find it, even at noon.
So it wasn't just being eccentric, it was performance art with a message.
A powerful visual metaphor indicting a system he saw as morally bankrupt, forcing people to confront their own authenticity or lack thereof.
And then his home, the barrel, or well, the large tub. Hard to picture choosing that.
It really is. The sources mention this pithos, this large ceramic jar, usually for storage.
Yeah.
That was his dwelling. It symbolized his extreme detachment from wealth, from conventional comfort.
He chose this.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
A deliberate, audacious choice. A declaration of independence from property, social expectations, domesticity itself. It represented his physical and intellectual freedom.
Like saying, I need nothing more than basic shelter.
Exactly. Showing that real security, real contentment comes from inside, not from possessions. He was powerfully saying, look, I can live fully with nothing. I'm free. What you really need and how much of what you have is actually trapping you.
A living question mark. And maybe the most legendary story, the one that just perfectly sums up his attitude to power and self-sufficiency, is that encounter with Alexander the Great.
Ah, yes, the ultimate showdown in a way.
Imagine the most powerful man in the known world, conqueror of empires, comes to see this guy living in a jar. The setup alone is incredible.
It's truly iconic. Alexander hears about this strange philosopher, seeks him out, finds Diogenes, apparently just basking in the sun, enjoying its warmth.
Just chilling.
Pretty much. Alexander, maybe feeling generous or maybe testing him, offers Diogenes anything he desires, anything at all.
Riches, power, a palace.
That's probably what Alexander expected. But Diogenes' reply, legendary, utterly defiant, stand out of my light.
That's it. Just move. You're blocking my sun.
Some accounts add a bit more, like, don't take from me what you cannot give, or I don't ask favors. But the core is that blunt, stunning dismissal, stand out of my light.
It's almost funny. It's so blunt. To the most powerful man alive.
And that's the genius of it. It perfectly captures Diogenes' core belief. Freedom, independence, these are the greatest values. Way beyond worldly power or riches. He had nothing, yet owed nothing to anyone, not even Alexander.
He didn't need Alexander's gifts.
Didn't need them at all. He was self-sufficient. It was autarkia in action. True wealth isn't having much, it's needing nothing from others. The sunlight, basic, natural, was worth more than anything a king could offer.
And Alexander's reaction?
Reportedly, Alexander was so struck by his spirit, his sheer independence, that he said something like, indeed, if I were not Alexander, I would wish to be Diogenes.
Wow, the conqueror recognizing a different kind of power.
A deeper form of freedom, perhaps?
So, all these behaviors, the lantern, the barrel, telling Alexander to get lost, they seem rude, mocking, provocative. But they weren't just random acts of weirdness.
Not at all. The sources are clear. These were deliberate tools. carefully chosen actions. Diogenes used them as a living critique of society's superficiality, its false values, its artificial rules.
Using shock value for a purpose.
Exactly. Shock, humor, scandal, whatever it took to force people to confront their own assumptions. About the good life, about what's important, about how enslaved they were by conventions they never questioned. He wasn't just an eccentric. He was a philosophical performance artist,
Using his life as the medium.
trying to shake people out of complacency. His goal was realization, not just offense.
It really makes you think about modern provocateurs, doesn't it? Artists, commentators, activists. Are their methods serving a deeper point, like Diogenes, or is it just for clicks, for outrage? He gives us a sharp way to look at that. Okay, so let's deconstruct Diogenes' philosophy a bit more formally. It really was a radical break from the abstract thinking common in classical Greek philosophy, wasn't it? He wasn't building grand systems like Plato or Aristotle.
Not at all. His approach was completely different. Practical, concrete, direct. Philosophy for the street, you could say, not the ivory tower. For Diogenes, virtue wasn't some intellectual concept to be debated endlessly.
It was about living.
It was a way of life, a form of behavior, a practical skill almost, something to be lived, breathed, acted out, not just theorized about. That made it incredibly accessible in one way, but also incredibly demanding. It was about doing, fundamentally.
And yet he still seemed to follow Socrates' idea that virtue is knowledge. But his idea of knowledge was different, right? Not book learning.
Yes, his take was unique, very pragmatic. He valued that Socratic quest for self-knowledge, sure, but for Diogenes, knowledge wasn't about abstract theories or complex arguments. It was practical wisdom.
Wisdom for living.
Exactly. A lifestyle reflecting natural living. To know virtue meant to live virtuously. It wasn't about understanding the definition of courage. It was about being courageous, challenging hypocrisy, applying wisdom directly to how you acted every day.
Ensuring your actions matched your core principles.
Right. Living simply, independently. That practical wisdom was the knowledge he valued.
And that practical understanding ties straight into his view on happiness. He was adamant. True happiness isn't found in external things, not objects, not circumstances, not other people's opinions. It's all internal.
Precisely. Happiness resides entirely in your internal attitude and living in sync with nature.
Here.
This was revolutionary, especially in a society much like ours that often equates happiness with wealth, status, pleasure, getting more stuff.
He argued wealth actually prevents happiness.
He did, vehemently. He believed wealth and luxury don't bring happiness. They do the opposite. They create dependence, foster endless desires, keep you chasing things you don't control. They prevent true contentment.
Because if your happiness depends on something outside you,
Then that thing has power over you. You're enslaved to it. By finding happiness internally, through that autarkia, Diogenes claimed total freedom from that kind of external control, from that kind of suffering.
train the mind, find contentment anywhere.
That was the idea. With anything or with nothing.
So given all that nature, self-sufficiency, internal happiness, it's no wonder he was famous for rejecting almost all societal rules and traditions. He saw them as fundamentally rotten.
He really did. He believed these conventions, these rules, while maybe seeming to create order, actually restrict human freedom. He saw them as unnatural.
Arbitrary constructs.
Exactly. A web of polite finance that alienate people from their true natural selves and just breed hypocrisy. This deep conviction justified his mocking, critical stance. He wasn't just being difficult. He was demonstrating the absurdity of these rules by deliberately breaking them.
Like eating in the marketplace?
Eating in the marketplace, performing bodily functions in public, speaking bluntly without a filter. Even that famous story of bringing a plucked chicken to Plato's academy after Plato defined man as a featherless biped.
Okay, that's pretty pointed.
All acts designed to show how ridiculous he found society's unexamined rules and definitions. His whole life was a constant question mark aimed at convention. Which, this raises an important question. If society's rules are mostly unnatural things that box us in, what does real freedom look like? Beyond just, say, political rights.
And that really gets to the heart of it, doesn't it? Diogenes' whole philosophy boils down to his definition of freedom. Not political freedom in the usual sense, but something deeper. Independence from externals, true self-sufficiency.
Absolutely. His understanding of freedom was profoundly psychological. Liberation. It meant being independent inside your own head, in your chosen way of life, no matter what pressures came from outside.
Free from want, free from needing approval.
Free from want, free from others' opinions, free from fashion, status, even basic comfort if necessary. True freedom was an internal state, breaking the psychological chains forged by convention and endless desire.
So if you could live contentedly with nothing,
Then you were truly free, because there was nothing the world could take from you, no leverage anyone could use against you. He was free because he saw external circumstances as basically irrelevant to inner peace and autonomy.
so that radical simplicity wasn't just a lifestyle. It was his ultimate statement of freedom, a living demonstration of personal liberation. Now, Diogenes' philosophy, as unconventional, as confrontational as it was, it actually had a significant impact, didn't it? Especially on the Hellenistic schools that came after him. He wasn't just some forgotten oddball in a barrel. He left a real mark.
Oh, definitely. You can trace his influence quite clearly, especially, as you say, in Stoicism, which became one of the most influential schools of that whole period.
How so? What did the Stoics pick up from him?
Well, the Stoics, who came along a bit after Diogenes, they directly adopted several key Cynic themes. That idea of autarkia, self-sufficiency, central to Stoicism, living according to nature, big Stoic principle. The focus on virtue as the highest good, absolutely. Indifference to external things like wealth or health, that's classic Stoicism. But you see its roots strongly in Diogenes and the Cynics.
So they kind of built on his foundation, maybe made it a bit less abrasive?
You could say that. Stoicism developed a more systematic, perhaps more socially acceptable framework. They focus more on inner tranquility through reason, self-control, fulfilling your social duties. It was less overtly provocative than Diogenes' approach. But those core principles of inner resilience, independence from externals, they're deeply rooted in the Cynic tradition he championed. He really did lay a lot of the ethical groundwork.
So he didn't just talk about these ideas, he lived them so intensely, so publicly, that it forced others to grapple with them. And that leads to a bigger point about cynicism generally. Diogenes really showed that philosophy isn't just some academic thing, right? Not just dusty books or abstract debates.
Exactly. His life was the ultimate proof that philosophy is fundamentally directly tied to how you live. Your lifestyle, your choices, your actions. For Diogenes, life and thought were inseparable.
A powerful example of living your beliefs.
Undeniable. Making philosophy something you do every moment, not just something you discuss. For the Cynics, real understanding wasn't found in a classroom. It was found in the grit of daily life. Through practice, discipline, often defiant action. His whole existence was a philosophical statement, basically holding up a mirror to society's contradictions, asking, do your actions match your supposed beliefs?
And what's really striking is how relevant Diogenes still feels today. He keeps popping up as this potent symbol in debates about consumerism, artificial values, freedom. He's not just history, he's a constant provocation.
He absolutely is. Think about our world now, saturated with stuff, obsessed with online validation, driven by desires that advertisers create. Diogenes' radical simplicity, his idea of freedom, feels incredibly powerful, almost necessary as a counterpoint.
He makes us ask uncomfortable questions.
Deeply uncomfortable questions. Do we really need all this? Are we living authentically true to our own values, or are we just performing for others, following conventions that don't actually serve us? His critique forces us to examine our own relationship with materialism, with public opinion, with expectations.
So connecting it to the bigger picture.
Yeah, if we connect this to the bigger picture, Diogenes forces us to ask, what do we truly value deep down? And is our actual life aligned with those values? Or are we just conforming, just chasing fleeting external rewards because society tells us to? He's this powerful reminder that maybe, just maybe, true liberation lies not in getting more, but in stripping away the unnecessary, the fake, and reconnecting with what's genuinely essential.
What an incredible figure. We've journeyed through his life, his philosophy. Diogenes really did challenge everything, every convention. From how he lived in that barrel to how he spoke truth to power, even to Alexander. He just lived his truth, didn't he? No matter how uncomfortable or shocking it was for everyone else.
He really did. That single-minded focus on virtue, on freedom, that utter contempt for the superficial. It's just so compelling, so radical, even now.
His example, his willingness to just stand apart, expose himself like that, it really does make you think, doesn't it? What does freedom or virtue really mean for us today in our lives?
Absolutely. In a world constantly pushing us towards more stuff, more status, more validation, Diogenes' challenge to norms is still such a potent tool for self-examination. He forces us to look inward, define our own values, and maybe question the real cost of fitting in, the hidden weight of chasing approval.
So what does this all mean for you listening? As we wrap up this deep dive, maybe Diogenes' barrel isn't just some historical curiosity, some ancient weirdness.
Maybe not.
Perhaps it's a stark, yeah, uncomfortable reminder of what it might truly mean to be free, really self-sufficient. Or maybe it's just a nudge to question the light we choose to live in and who or what might be casting a shadow on our own genuine selves. Keep questioning, keep exploring, and we'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.